So in the meantime, we're fighting for space on the road, so that's a big part of our program. And then over in the, I'm in the transportation department, and over in the Parks Bureau, one of my colleagues, George Hudson, is working on off-street paths, and he's taken an old railroad line and converted it to this beautiful trail that heads east to Mount Hood. Doesn't go all the way, but heads east in that direction. He's put a trail along an old rail line that was a very challenging project, and now he's going to get to work on this one, because this one wasn't so good. A little bit of a problematic trail that we had at the time, and this is on the east side of the Willamette River in downtown, right across the river from Willamette, from the waterfront park that I showed you. Now, once upon the day, river commerce ruled the day in Portland, Oregon, and this is the river. And as time wore on, the Willamette River became an industrial toxic stew, keeping boats afloat, but it devastated all its living creatures and certainly its majesty. And jumping on the river destruction bandwagon was the Federal Highway Administration during that era. And they invested across the country $26 billion in 41,000 miles of highways, a surface equivalent to that of West Virginia. The concrete that was invested in that era would build 6 sidewalks to the moon. And one of those highways, I-5, was plopped right down next to the Willamette River on the east side in one stupendous example of short-sighted use of prime riverfront property. And y'all know this happened all over the country, is that the prime riverfronts got gobbled up by not such prime infrastructure. And the governor's appointed highway developer drove over from rural eastern Oregon, and he looked at the Willamette River, which was so degraded and filled with yuck, and he said, well, this would be a perfect place to put, nobody cares about this river, obviously, it's like an open-air toilet, we might as well slap the highway right here because obviously nobody cares about it. And it took no time at all for City Council to realize what a lemon they were stuck with. And then they spent the next several decades trying to decide whether to bury the freeway or elevate the freeway or move the freeway or close the freeway. And they kept reversing themselves back and forth. It was obviously going to be very expensive and challenging to do. And finally, in the early 1990s, our leaders decided that they would see this downtown portion of I-5 in hell. But in the meantime, Portlanders and visitors alike would get to experience the Willamette River by foot or bike, despite the freeway's looming presence. And they basically said, you know, hang out there if you want to, you miserable monster. We'll be over here ignoring you while we recapture the precious riverfront that you stole from us. And thus began the reclamation of the Willamette River and the quest for a critical connection in our bikeway system. Now, you can probably imagine that given that it's a navigable waterway and the freeway is literally right next to the water, in the water, that it's going to be a challenging project. So we had over 30 regulatory agencies involved. We had endangered coho salmon in the river. We had a nesting bald eagle nearby. We had, and that was during the era that it was protected. Then we also had, because it's a navigable waterway, you've got the Coast Guard involved, and you've got the Army Corps of Engineers involved, you've got the Federal Highway Administration, the Oregon Department of Transportation, and a myriad of other agencies that are every single one of them has some complex permit process, mostly not in sync with each other, conflicting with each other. So my colleague George Hudson is working away at this, and he's diligently gone through 10 years of getting permits, and he's come down to the construction window that he's organized in between the salmon spawning season and the bird nesting season. He's got this narrow window of construction to do this project, and he's envisioned the way we're going to solve the problem of the highway is we're going to float a trail in the river like this. We're going to put deep spires down into the river, and we're going to float a trail, and it's going to become the longest floating trail, or one of the longest floating trails of its kind in the country. So he's kind of stuck in bureaucratic hell because he's got the Army Corps of Engineers saying they can't give him the permit unless he's got a permit from the Oregon Department of Transportation, and they won't give him a permit until he gets the permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. So he's going in a circle, and many of you have been there in your permitting process. It's a pain in the butt. And he finally gets the Army Corps of Engineers to give him a conditional permit if he can go down to Salem and get the signature from ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation. So he literally jumps in the car with this document, and he heads down to Salem, and he finds the room where the guy is, and he's in a meeting. So George starts pacing outside the meeting room. There's a window, so the guy can clearly see that George is stalking him. And he's basically holding up this permit, and he's like kind of menacing the guy in the room, and the guy in the room is ignoring him. And finally the door opens, he's been pacing the hall for 2 hours, and the guy stalks out right by George as if he hasn't seen him, and heads down the hall. George basically tails him down the hall like a spy, and it's almost like a Wile E. Coyote trying to catch the rabbit. He kind of goes for the kill, and whoosh, there's empty air, so he turns the corner and he sees that the guy's gone into the bathroom, the men's room. And George doesn't even hesitate. He follows him into the bathroom, And he waits there by the urinal. He's standing in front of the door, and when the guy finishes and he heads for the door, George says, "You're not leaving till you sign this document." And he hands him a pen, and that's how we got the permits for the Eastbank Esplanade. The floating walkway in the city of Portland is basically, in order to deal with one toxic waste zone, we had to send George into another one. And my book is all full of stories like this, and I don't have time to tell you all of them, so I would love to. But Joe would kill me, so I'm not going to. I'll just tell you a few last things. Oh, I do want to tell you about the East. I do want to tell you one more thing about the Eastbank, and that is that when it opened, the Oregonian newspaper wrote the following editorial. That's our largest paper in Oregon. They said, "It's just a noisy new pencil fin park along the freeway. At $419 a lineal inch, Portland can boast having the costliest bike and jogging path in America, if not the world." This was the third in a series of articles they had written, slamming this trail, saying that it was a disaster and it would never be used. And this was in spring of 2001. And you all know what happened on September 11th. And on September 22nd, thousands of Portlanders came down to the river, and they stood on the East Bank with candles, and they made a circle around the river, 2 bridges and the waterfront park on the other side, holding these candles. Everybody weeping and having this moment of solidarity and faith and community in support of the, in support of the tragedy. And the Oregonian then said, basically, "Whoops, I think we screwed this one up." And they then wrote basically a retraction, and said that the Eastbank Esplanade was the best investment of the year. This happens all the time, you guys. Every single community I'm at, there's some nasty editorial, the newspaper doesn't get it, the media slams it, and yet it's just, there's a visceral reaction. Oh, this change is bad and nobody's going to use it. And in every single community, people start using bicycles and the sky does not fall and everything works fine. So you just have to have a thick skin in this field and be in it for the long haul.